Throughout middle school and even the beginning of high school, my mom would always joke around with me about how she thought I was really shy in front of her and in front of other people, and tried to get me to step out of my comfort zone once in a while. And mom, that one day I didn't wish you happy birthday wasn't because I was shy, it's because I was mad at you. Now, what my mom didn't know was that it wasn't that I didn't want to talk to people. I did. But because of a fear of peer pressure to only do things that were cool and me trying to be a people pleaser, I naturally thought that almost every little mistake I made would be extremely embarrassing. I held the opinions that other people had of me over my own, and stretched it to the point where I thought that saying nothing was the safe way out of taking a risk to say something. Now, the truth is, if you do a little digging, you can find stories like mine across the world. Every day, whether it's through work, school, our home, or our friends, we interact with people who have social anxiety every single day. And I'm sure many of you in the audience have struggled with it yourselves. I know I have. One of the most unique things about people who have social anxiety is that we can make it awfully hard for you to notice. Oftentimes, my friends see me having calm, comfortable conversations with small and large groups of people. But what they didn't see was the hundreds of times I would replay those conversations in my head and pick out all the minuscule imperfections that I thought were either completely embarrassing for myself or offensive to someone else. Even though that side of me never fully went away, I was able to reduce my social anxiety to the point where it no longer interferes with my daily interactions. And that's why everybody can help somebody, whether that's your own self, a loved one, or even a person you just met, overcome it. And in your eyes, you may view the situation our world has been in for the past 2 years as one that's made it extremely difficult for people like me to have overcome our social anxiety. But today, I'm asking each and every one of you in the audience to take a step back and see how you can spin my story into something you can use to find your own triggers of social anxiety and a plan to help you overcome it. Now, when you hear the word social anxiety, all of you are probably conjuring up an image in your head of someone who's quiet, timid, and generally an introvert. But it's important that we don't confuse social anxiety for social awkwardness. People who have social anxiety actually usually have average to above average social skills. In fact, many times in a conversation when I think I'm coming off in an odd or unnatural way, after receiving feedback, chances are I'm coming off perfectly fine. So then, if I had the tools necessary to talk openly and freely to anyone I wanted, what was the cause of my social anxiety? Well, for most people, the answer is a fear of being embarrassed, humiliated, or unintentionally offending someone. For me, 2 main aspects played the biggest role. One was a fear of being judged for every little mistake I made. And 2, a fear that new people I met would develop a permanent negative image of me just because I made a small mistake. See, there were 2 groups of people that I felt most vulnerable around and that I thought I would make these mistakes around. One was peers or classmates, especially those just a few years older than I was. Even though in my mind I wanted to do something as simple as saying hi to start a conversation so badly, there was always a part of me that was screaming, no, don't ruin the positive image they have of you. And if we actually did get to having a conversation, regardless of how well that conversation was going, in the back of my mind I was secretly praying that it would end as soon as possible. Why? Because I didn't want to make what I thought was a huge error, which could be as simple as asking someone to repeat what they said because I didn't hear them, or stuttering a few times in a conversation that I thought would completely alter the way they thought of me, for the worse. In individual interactions, whenever I made one of these actually undetectable mistakes, I would be totally disheartened and look for ways to avoid interaction with that person ever again. And in group settings, whenever I said I wanted to say something, whether that was a joke I thought was funny or insight into a topic that us teenagers just love to have deep conversations on, I always held myself back because of the fear that it wouldn't be cool or wasn't funny or that no one really agreed with. And this was really puzzling for me because the fears that I just detailed rarely ever came to fruition, but they still held such a tight grip over me. Now, the next group that I felt vulnerable around was professionals, specifically speaking to them in any setting where my words weren't entirely pre-planned. By this, I don't mean delivering a formal presentation, rather having an off-topic discussion with the judges of my science fair project, or when my teachers tried to initiate a fun conversation with me after class. In all of these scenarios, despite the confidence I had been building up in my public speaking skills, the incessant fear that I would say something that was either A, embarrassing, or that would miscommunicate the intentions I actually had towards someone held me back from saying so many things that, looking back, could have earned me recognition, or could have simply made someone else's day. Now, you may notice that I've been referencing my social anxiety as though I've overcome it, a thing of the past. And to a certain extent, that's true. I'm speaking directly to quite a large audience today. The reason for that is because everything changed 2 years ago when we switched to online school, online competitions, online events, online everything. And I know you hearing me say this is initially puzzling. How did a complete elimination of face-to-face interaction and a reliance on the internet, which, as you all know, can harbor some of the most hateful, inconsiderate messages we as humans can create, help me subdue my social anxiety? And how might you use it to identify and resolve your own triggers? Well, think of it this way. We're all aware of how one of the most dangerous aspects of social media, and for that matter, any form of virtual interaction, is the aspect of anonymity. Parents are constantly and justifiably worrying who their teenagers are chatting with, because honestly, who knows if it's just another friend or someone who they probably shouldn't be talking to. Society as a whole is encouraging us to stay accountable online and to not spread hate just because we can say something and get away with it without being caught. Let me be clear. These two messages are undoubtedly essential, and we must continue to preach caution online. But for me, I was able to use the internet and the protection that it offered as a stepping stool to help overcome my anxiety when we return to in-person environments. How can you all do this? Well, there's no clear, definitive approach. But for those of you struggling with social anxiety, I want to share what worked for me. I still have a clear recollection of the intense rush of anxiety I felt every Monday and Wednesday at 5:30 before the start of our debate practice in freshman year. Now, speaking in front of this experienced group of small professional debaters, even though they were just practice rounds, was nerve-wracking for me, especially because it was my first year. Not only did it cause me, though, an unhealthy amount of stress to actually prepare for and deliver my speech, but even talking to them, my very own teammates, before and after practice, wasn't enjoyable. Because my mind was preoccupied with the thoughts on how hard everyone else in the room must have been judging my performance. When we made the switch to virtual practices last year when I was a sophomore, I gradually felt a reduction in this anxiety. I was eager and excited to present in front of all of these same people. Why? Well, because there was something about talking behind a computer screen instead of face-to-face that gave me a newfound sense of confidence. I realized that the pandemic had given me a rare opportunity to develop my confidence in informal conversations and lessen my anxiety in a way that would stick when we inevitably returned to in-person environments. So I started off simple. My friends and I started using social media apps to stay in touch, and one of the most popular ones we used was Discord. Now, as a part of Discord, I started joining more and more voice calls with some of my close friends, distant friends, and people who I didn't really know but shared the similar interests as I did. And what I noticed was that as I started posting my thoughts, reactions, and ideas on a comment thread or a large public server, I was able to observe the reactions I received. Even when I didn't observe the support or agreement I was looking for, I persisted. Initially, I had resorted to deleting or changing my message to align with the beliefs that the other people at the end of the conversation held. But eventually, I found the courage in myself to stick with my beliefs, whether those were on a trivial subject like who we thought would win the NBA Finals, or a more important subject like bioethicality. And I wasn't afraid to not change my thoughts and thoroughly believe that the person on the other end of the conversation was enjoying it. Now, Something else I noticed was that since we were interacting online, I couldn't observe all the body cues or facial expressions that the other person was giving off. And you're all well aware that this is essential to a conversation. But for me, I realized that maybe when we were in person, I was looking too hard for any potential body language that could have signaled that the person was disinterested in our conversation, just so that I could use it as an excuse to limit my interaction with them, instead of taking it a step further and changing the topic. Now, when I noticed that these body cues weren't happening and that I could talk to them without worrying about them, I saw something else. The internet could be a forgiving place for me. Oftentimes, the worst reaction I've gotten is no response at all. And the advantage of doing it online was, in the worst case, I could just close my computer. On top of all of these factors, I also engaged in a lot of virtual volunteering and tutoring last year. I run a student-led organization called Youth Against Cancer that connects high school mentors with youth cancer patients to provide free tutoring in their forced time away from school. As part of this last year, I was spending a lot of time on Zoom calls, interacting with patients and their families. During these calls, I was petrified of saying something that could be misinterpreted in any way, shape, or form to seem like I was being offensive. But instead of keeping our conversation to a minimum, I took an extra second or two to process what I actually had to say and said it. And since we were interacting online, that extra second or two wasn't really noticeable. And over time, as I kept joining these calls, I observed a key pattern. Even when interacting with the groups that I felt most vulnerable around, which again were my peers, professionals, and in this case, patients and their families, I was rarely ever, extrinsically or intrinsically, judged for my ideas. These people wanted to continue our positive conversation. And whenever instances of embarrassment did occur, they weren't nearly as big as I had blown them up to be in my imagination, and definitely did not alter those people's perceptions of me. In fact, one of the teenage students that I personally worked with told me something. He said that he appreciated me taking the time to just talk to him in an open, lighthearted conversation just as much as he appreciated my tutoring. This was one of the most remarkable and humbling pieces of feedback I've received in my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my presence behind a computer screen, in my pajamas, sitting in my room, was wanted by someone who I just met. And it showed me that my rare willingness to open up and relax in front of new people was just as beneficial for them as it was for me. Now, I want to circle back to the debate experience that I detailed earlier. The combination of all these factors that built my confidence led me to doing more of the simple things, whether that was just turning on my camera or unmuting myself more often. And I realized that I often had something enjoyable and pleasant to say and didn't have to worry so much about coming off in the wrong way. At a debate competition I went to just a few weeks ago, I was talking to the opposing team that we just engaged in an intense round with for 10 to 15 minutes about fun conversations about each other. And I was told that I was one of the most respectful debaters they had ever encountered. This was the second instance where someone I had just met told me how they enjoyed relating to me and listening to me spill my thoughts. And now, being a captain of the debate team, doing something as simple as asking one of our new team members how they're feeling that day or learning more about their backstory has been a huge step forward from my scared freshman self. Obviously, everyone's experience with social anxiety is drastically different, and there's no one solution that fits all. But what I hope you can take from this is to be able to identify your own triggers and own possible solutions to it by finding a source of protection. If you can work in those baby steps towards the right direction and find that source of protection, which for me was just a computer screen, then one day you might find yourself being the one to start a conversation or to continue it. Now, the key thing about starting these conversations is it's one of the things that impacted me the most. What happened in my case was I built my confidence to the point where I wanted to engage in more small talk with the people I trusted the most, be it a best friend or my sister. And once I saw that these people didn't have a terrible reaction just because I forgot to say thank you after asking for a favor, or because I shared a different view on an important subject than the conventional way of thinking. I was eager to engage in extended, deeper conversations with anyone, regardless of who they were or how many people were listening in person. This is the essence of managing your social anxiety. Putting yourself voluntarily in a position to be able to talk to other people rather than involuntarily. Now, for those of you who know how it feels to struggle with social anxiety, consider stepping in to help those who are in need of it. It can be as simple as a nod in agreement after they finish talking, to explaining to them how what they had to share impacted you in a positive way. Now, I don't want you guys leaving here thinking next time you interact with someone who seems a little nervous, you're just going to nod with them and pretend like you're listening to what they're saying. As I mentioned before, that's not enough. You might not even know that the person you're talking to has social anxiety. You have to proactively seek out those characteristics that they're emitting that indicate their social anxiety, which again for me might have been just stuttering in a conversation that I felt very passionate about and had given hundreds of times. And once you do that, it's essential that you make them as comfortable as you can and guide them through the conversation. Continue it and re-engage with them after you would attend an event or after you exit a conference call so that you can share ideas and feedback and they can get confidence that what they had to say was valuable and true. If we want to build a better world, we have to ensure that everyone, particularly our youth, has the confidence and the voice they need to share their ideas with everyone in a variety of settings, because even an informal conversation can go a long way. It's important that we remember that these are the people that are going to contribute the most significantly to the future of our world, and we need to make sure that their voices are both heard and valued. I want to leave you with this. Social anxiety is something that we all battle at some point in our lives. But for those of you who feel like it's controlling you, remember this. Despite everything you've been through, you're still here. That's a big enough of accomplishment in and of itself. And if you find the courage to take not one giant leap of faith, but small steps towards transforming your anxiety into something you can control, then you yourself might one day, just like me, find yourself advocating on a stage on behalf of others and sharing your story with the rest of the world. Thank you.